It's no secret that we at Scholastic Lutherans are fans of scholastic philosophy, as well as the application of the scholastic method to theology. As I have often lamented, many confessional Lutherans dogmatically oppose scholasticism. I have responded to this numerous times, and I'm going to add more to that discussion today by summarizing the brilliant defense of scholasticism from the Lutheran position written by Johann Heinrich Posewitz in the preface to his Scholastic Theology. This is a work I am actively translating and will hopefully be available soon to everyone. Let's begin. Posewitz is not unaware of the vitriolic hatred towards scholastic philosophy and theology in his day. We ourselves experience this today, in fact. Posewitz writes that it is scarcely unknown to anyone that scholastic theology is held in contempt by many. They labor with much rhetorical effort and every exertion of their minds to persuade others that it must be avoided, eradicated, and eliminated from theological schools, as though it were a pestilence or a serpent lurking in the grass. I see this all the time today. Think of the presuppositionalists who say that an affirmation of basic Thomistic principles is an affirmation of all Thomistic theology. These thinkers in Postwitz's day, just as ours, believed that scholastic theology was fundamentally a confusion of philosophy and theology, mingling them in ways that's not right for the Christian theologian. I recall James White once citing Colossians 2:8 as proof that philosophy itself is fundamentally problematic. But we respond with Posewitz. I cannot deny that the scholastics widely apply philosophy, its terms, distinctions, and principles to theological questions. No one who has even briefly tasted their writings can be ignorant of this. However, from this, it is not rightly inferred that theology and philosophy are confused. On the contrary, these philosophical terms, distinctions, and principles are not only useful, but necessary in explaining the doctrines of faith. Posewitz continues to say that to properly have a thorough knowledge, though not perfect comprehension, of course, of the doctrine of the Trinity, one must have knowledge of philosophical terms like essence, existentia, person, suppositum, etc. He also adds that the real, actual, and virtual distinctions, alongside the distinctions of reason between the reasoning mind and the reasoned mind, are all, quote, of the greatest and most necessary use in this mystery. One of the best things, he says in this regard, is, quote, without proper and accurate distinctions here between essence and relations, the entire mystery collapses. He continues to demonstrate that the persons must be distinguished relationally. So we see that for proper theological conclusions, the terminology and distinctions of scholasticism are quite valuable, almost necessary. Posewitz also briefly mentions something quite important that should be fairly obvious, but is lost out on many biblicists today. Quote, without the use of the principles of reason, neither can anything be proved from Scripture by consequence, nor can disputes with an adversary over questions of faith be conducted. This is quite important. It appears that many today are looking entirely for proof texts to defend their doctrines, but such usually don't exist. We do not absolutely need the Johannine comma to be in the original texts to demonstrate the doctrine of the Trinity. This is something that all Lutherans will affirm, though they may not see the implications. There is a distinction between the ministerial use of reason and the magisterial use of reason, where the former is the use of reason to properly explain and define theological truths without overstepping the boundaries of reason, while the latter is the use of reason to deny theological truths or affirm them on the basis of reason alone, apart from any influence of the Scriptures. Do the scholastics sometimes employ the magisterial use of reason? Unfortunately, yes, but this does not faze Posewitz. Posewitz writes, quote, if the misuse of reason is understood universally of all, it is undoubtedly false. The example of one or another scholastic does not persuade me. Most use the principles of reason not to confirm, but to illustrate the dogmas of faith. Posewitz continues to cite Thomas Aquinas as saying that the doctrine of the Trinity cannot be demonstrated by natural reason in the Summa Part 1, Question 32, Article 4. Posewitz summarizes his view quite well. Quote, reason can be applied in two ways regarding faith. First, it may be used to prove that God is one and similar truths. Second, it may be applied to manifestation, the mystery of the Trinity. Given the presupposition of the Trinity, reason can show congruence with certain effects. Posewitz therefore affirms the use of natural theology, as well as the ministerial use of reason, in elucidating and illuminating mysteries of faith. Posewitz further responds to this objection that there is a frequent misuse of reason by pointing out that such is not proper to scholasticism as such. As he says, quote, "This abuse does not condemn the whole discipline." He continues to demonstrate that a physician can err in diagnosing an illness or a jurist could render a poor judgment, but we do not therefore condemn the medical and legal disciplines as such. Owen Strachan once wrote that because Thomas Aquinas gets the matter of salvation wrong, we should discard practically his entire system. He contends that having a different gospel constitutes a different God. This sounds reasonable at first, but consider what he's saying. If someone gets the gospel wrong, then they cannot list out the divine attributes and see their connection. I don't see a connection there whatsoever, and I don't think Posewitz would see one either. He and the other Lutheran scholastics, alongside the Reformed scholastics, would scoff at such silly suggestions. Posewitz writes, quote, "Even if scholastic theology contains many errors, it does not mean the entire discipline is imperiled, any more than other arts are by specific abuses. Once the particular abuses are removed, the proper use remains sufficiently evident." I recognize Straughan's concern, but Posewitz has a much better approach. Quote, "Although they, Aquinas and Scotus, are criticized for many errors, their method of theology, as such, does not merit even the slightest reproach. Moreover, not everyone can read their writings without danger to the various errors they contain." He then proceeds to cite Johann Gerhard as saying, quote, "No one should approach the reading of the scholastics without first acquiring a solid and accurate knowledge of sound theology from sacred scriptures. Otherwise, he will wander aimlessly and be swept away by various opinions." Even with this in mind, Posewitz adds that there are aspects of scholastic theology, without serious error, that anyone can read and commit to memory. Another objection, one I admit is understandable, is that the scholastics often debated topics that were ultimately unnecessary. Posewitz responds that, frankly, many topics that are judged useless by some may actually be useful. I think the paradigm example of this is the question, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Sure, the number of angels does not matter, and this exact question does not need to be answered. But it is ultimately asking about the nature of spiritual entities, whether they occupy space or not. This is quite relevant for theology as we discuss illocality, both in terms of omnipresence and in terms of Christ's presence in the Eucharist. Posewitz ultimately considers himself a member of the Lutheran tradition, and as such, he cites numerous Lutherans that supported scholasticism, like Jacob Martini, Johann Gerhard, Artie Runge, and Gerhard Titius. I think he's correct, and there are numerous other figures to mention like Kalov, Sharp, Veltheim, and Schiebler. Of course, these are unique figures, and Kalov, for example, is not wholesale accepting scholasticism. But overall, we can say that they would find themselves in some kind of scholastic tradition broadly. By promoting scholastic theology, we are not tearing down the Reformation. Instead, we are retrieving the natural progression of the Reformation into the advanced, technical, and thorough realms of scholasticism. Thank you all for listening.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching another Scholastic Lutherans video. If you'd like to support us, you can follow us on Twitter at Gerhard's Ghost, or contribute on Patreon at Scholastic Lutherans. There you'll get access to our Telegram chat and other perks. Links can be found in the description. Subscribe, like, or leave a comment, and have a nice day.